is I don't know how I should call it, but your presence in our studio nowadays seems to happen like a historic event. Once in a while,
is that what
we see you.
Yeah, no, we'll do more of it.
Yes. We have to see you more.
Yeah,
we have to see you more.
I agree.
But I hope you're well.
By His grace, we are managing. Now, you don't manage and see.
Even for a member of parliament.
Don't manage and see.
Because I recall, I think it was recently one of your colleagues, even in the majority, who was complaining about the number of times you go to parliament and the fact that sometimes you just go to parliament and sit down, and it was costing members of parliament in terms of fuel.
Yeah. It's going to get worse going forward because with the IMF program and the way it is structured, there will really not be much work in parliament.
There will really not be much work in parliament? Yeah. What does that mean?
You know, this government traditionally has functioned on nothing more than borrowing.
Okay.
So Parliament has been kept busy over the last couple of years, basically looking at loans and in some instances the resulting commercial agreements to implement some of those programs.
Okay.
It's not going to happen going forward. The program envisages some cuts in key project financing.
Okay.
The program is looking more to recalibrate the government expenditure and reset the fiscal framework to make it more sustainable, but to find a way to improve targeting and to improve the level of interventions and support given to the poor and the vulnerable.
Okay.
So social protection is going to take a center stage, but not in the manner that we have known it. If you take free SHS, it's a social protection program, but it is not being implemented as such. A social protection program has a way of discriminating between the rich and the poor and focus on supporting the poor to get economically active and to contribute their quota to the economic development of our country. And the principle basically envisages that the more you target the poor and the more you make resources available to, and opportunities available to the poor, they will eventually exit that bracket and will become very useful citizens to our economy. And so it is not one that the poor competes with the rich for the same interventions. And you see our free SHS concept clearly is at variance with this principle of helping the poor. It could also mean that if you properly target, then what you probably think you are giving to the poor, you could give the poor more. So if you have two children, say my child in secondary school, and a child from a poor household, he just doesn't need only free tuition. Okay, he needs to have the bursaries to prepare and come to school. And he needs the bursaries to acquire some of the things that don't come with free SHS. So the financial envelope required to get this child to enjoy the full benefits of the opportunities that you have created is not just about giving him free access and the rest, becomes a challenge. You have instances where, for instance, a child from a poor household who is going to a nursing training college, if you pay the fees, that child may still not go to school because that child probably needs an additional funding to prepare and go to school. So that is what we mean by targeting and making sure that resources are channeled in the right volumes and quantities to the poor to get them out. You don't understand. But where we are now, my child is enjoying free SHS and I can pay for it. Another child who needs my money to top up that additional expenditure that he needs to come to school is not getting it because you are using it to pay for my child's free education when I can pay for it. I hope you are getting the point. So I envisage IMF to improve efficiency in terms of social spending and to improve target. In fact, at the time that His Excellency John Dramani Mahama was president, people forget that the Ministry of Women and Children's Affairs was then Ministry of Women and Children's Affairs. Yeah. It was His Excellency John Dramani Mahama who decided to realign that ministry to focus on social protection. So we created the Ministry of Women, Children, and Social Protection. And there's a reason we created social protection, because we believe that majority of the vulnerable are within the class of our mothers and our sisters and our children, and they need special attention. And so social protection became a mainstreaming activity that needed to be a cross-cutting team, and somebody needed to coordinate that. And you remember Madame Oyelita was entrusted, and she is a consummate expert in social protection. Unfortunately, we have tended to think that once you're a woman activist, you should go to that ministry. You must understand that it is not just about that, but it's also about making sure that you understand the social protection flaw and you understand what it is that must be done. And during the time, we, through a World Bank program, started what we call the National Targeting Unit. And the National Targeting Unit was mandated to establish a national household register. And what that household register was to do was to identify poor households and put them on a national digital register. So if you were coming to support the poor, you just go to the register. So if I'm coming to support poor people in Upper East, I just go on the register. I don't need to ask anybody. There are criteria that you use to identify those households. So you can target those households and make sure that the interventions reach them. And we're supposed to do it across the country. These people came because they don't understand social protection. They died. After the first phase that we did in Upper East, Upper West, and Northern region, we couldn't proceed to Volta, we couldn't proceed to Central region, and we're supposed to start using the poverty index. So you move from regions that are low down the poverty index, and then gradually you cover the whole country. Because even for very urban communities, there are peri-urban communities, and there are poor people within urban communities. So you needed to properly, so we would have had a register now. And we can tell that once somebody is coming from my house doesn't qualify, for social protection. Because at least they have produced somebody who should be the anchor for eliminating poverty in that home. The fact that he's irresponsible doesn't necessarily mean that there's no capacity in that home. So I see that happening more with the World Bank program, where we genuinely provide support to the poor and the vulnerable.
There's a portion where, and I just cannot avoid this, because you said they do not understand social protection. I'll come back to some of the issues you've raised in the past and how come an IMF arrangement seems to work. Because it seems like if you had $3 billion, you could have gotten him to do the things we're asking all along. But they said you are the ones who do not. And it's the NDC that does not work, that has not proven a commitment to social protection. Because if you look at all the social protection policies that have come up, NHIS, LEAP, they mentioned free senior high school. They said they introduced them all. You are the party that is supposed to protect the poor, but yet they don't see any policy that's targeted towards them.
I think we are being called to discuss ignorance. Absolutely. What is social protection? Social protection is more about efficiency in social spending. It's not just about calling a program a social program. It is about efficiency in social spending. And when we started the free SHS, you would notice that ours was a very targeted one. We actually had a program from the World Bank targeted poor children, and providing full packages for those children, as opposed to a blanket, application of free. You don't call a program that supports a rich person as a social program. No. Social protection is not a mass program. Social protection is a targeted program. So if you have a situation where you have a program running at same level for the poor and the rich. That is regressive. In other words, you are actually subsidizing the rich from resources that should be going to the poor.
Okay.
You don't call that social protection. And that is the height of the ignorance of those who ask those questions. When you decide to build cheap compounds, okay, you are providing primary health care.
Okay.
And primary health care is at the root of the very poor and the vulnerable. The rich people don't go to cheap compounds. They don't go to district hospitals or polyclinics. As a matter of fact, they do it unless they need specialist attention that is in the tertiary hospitals. They would ordinarily seek private care. It is the poor that go to the cheap compounds. So when you have a government that was dedicated to building thousands of cheap compounds, and you ask that person to show a one social program, why should you answer for ignorance? Okay? So that discrimination within the healthcare system to target the poor and provide the most basic healthcare at the primary healthcare level is the height of social programming within the health sector. And the NDC is credited for majority of cheap compounds. Since NDC left office, the construction of cheap compounds have ceased. So who understands social protection? When you have a school feeding program, which everybody has inherited, and it is a program introduced at a point in time to take care of children in schools, and a child goes to school because he's enticed by the fact that he'll get a meal. But if that child has a torn dress, that will be teased at, he's very proud enough to stay at home and live with hunger. So you say, okay, how do I provide the full package to ensure that the poor child goes to school beaming with confidence and feeling capable to compete with anybody? So you provide that child with school uniforms. You provide that child with sandals. You make sure that when that child goes to school, he doesn't have to go and sit by a rich child who has a textbook to learn and feel inferior, but has a textbook. And we provided textbooks for basic schools and secondary schools. We provided uniforms. We provided sandals. And you ask me to produce one social program? Those uniforms were not distributed to students in Achimota Secondary School. They were provided to children in Kumblingo, in my village, in Sirgo, in Zoko. And those kids, when they got up, the first thing was that they wanted to be seen in the uniform. And they were excited to take their bath. And they were excited to be in a new uniform that they always saw the rich child wear. And that today, he is also wearing that. It is an excitement to go to school for them to see me for who I can become. And I can compete, I can study with confidence. So they shouldn't mix mass programs with social protection. Social protection is not a mass activity. It is a targeted activity with clear objective of accumulating resources in one poor center in order that those resources become adequate enough to fully utilize the opportunity. National health insurance has been a debate, but everybody knows the origins of national health insurance. It's not Kufo. Everybody knows that. The fact that you came to implement a program that was being experimented, you don't roll out such a major program across the country. You do a pilot. And we're running pilots in Nkuranza and other places to learn the lessons so that when we go national, In fact, at the time, we started with a mutual fund program. And the records are there. The NDC started experimenting and piloting an health insurance program. And there are success stories. So when you now came, it's good governance to pick the program and see the benefit in it and roll it out. And subsequent governments are supposed to improve it. But subsequent governments improved it up to MPP when they came and saw the kitty that was going to the National Health Insurance as a launch pad to take money to the center so the president can fly in the air and bath in the air. Okay. So National Health Insurance today is struggling because you and I pay levies totaling about 4.2 billion that should go to strengthen the National Health Insurance scheme. That money doesn't go to National Health Insurance scheme. One, they bring a capping system to take over 60% of that money. So it doesn't go to National, but you have paid the levy ostensibly to finance National Health Insurance. It doesn't go there. So the people who are now benefiting from the funding for National Health Insurance to fund obnoxious programs say that they are better at social protection. Inherent in the National Health Insurance program is the classification of the poor and the vulnerable, and the fact that attempts are made to roll them onto the program for free. That money, meant to ensure that the poor and the aged are enrolled free of charge because the funding is available, is being used by the president and his team at the center. And they are the people collapsing such an important scheme. And all they are doing is say that, oh, we did it, Akufo did it. How long can you rely on the hard work and the success of your father when you are of full age and all you are doing is to decimate what your father did? So, granted that Akufo did a wonderful job. It's Akufo-Addo Akufo. It's Bawumia Akufo. Did Akufo, what do you call it, President Akufo cap the funding to National Health Insurance? Did President Akufo take part of the money to the center so the president can fly in private jets? Did Professor Mills do that? Did His Excellency John Dramani Mahama do that? They all built on it because they understood the value of that social program. You don't understand the value, so the monies don't go. One, the money does not go because you have passed a law to take the money from them. There's a law they passed called the capital realignment or type of stuff, right? So you've passed a law to say, look, to hell with National Health Insurance. We are not going to give you the money. And you still have the audacity to be referring to President Akufo. If your father leaves you houses and you sell them, you collateralize them. Even diamond and bauxite buried that you have not seen with your naked eyes, you are using them to collect loans. And anytime they ask you about the way you are living your life carelessly, you say, oh, my father was a noble man. You don't know my father? My father was a stalwart of our national development. But you are what? That is the question. Akufo is resting. He's in a very wonderful retirement. We respect him for the work he did for our country, just as we respect all the presidents who have done work for us. But you are supposed to build on it in order that the country gets improvement. Look at where you've put us today. For the first time, we have arrived at an IMF where the IMF is a creditor. So for every creditor, you do an assessment of your client, whether he can pay or he cannot pay. Do you get it? Yeah. At our time, the IMF did an assessment on our economy and our ability to pay the IMF funding and our exposure to IMF. Today they did it. And the contrast is unbelievable. The IMF says at the time they arrived, the total exposure to Ghana if they were to service it, okay, you know they can't service it with cedis.
It must be with dollars, yeah.
With dollars or standard drawing rights. So they look to your reserves of foreign currency and see how that covers for your exposure. And they say at the time of the NDC, our gross international reserves constituted could cover 18%. It was about 18%. If you take our total exposure, it was just about 18% of how much we had sitting at the Bank of Ghana. So technically, we have close to 72% of reserves still available to spend after servicing the IMF. This assessment is saying at the time they came, your gross international reserves, including monies that do not even belong to Bank of Ghana. When you are looking at gross, that's what you are looking at. Your short-term maturities, Bank of Ghana, you have gone to borrow dollars on a repo basis or bridge finance that you need to pay. You normally have to take all those. But even if we were to say that you won't pay them, you are going to use all the money to pay us. Your reserves covers 161%. In other words, if you take all your reserves at Bank of Ghana, it will not be enough to pay your exposure to even the IMF alone. And the IMF is an insignificant creditor to Ghana. And the IMF is saying that they are worried that your coverage of what we have given you already will take all your reserves and you still have to go and get 61% more from somewhere to give to us. So this is a very risky client, not just to the people they are claiming they cannot pay, but even to us who have come to help them. And that by the end of this program, the reserves that we are going to help them build, introducing 15 billion of funding over 3 years, made up of IMF 3 billion, World Bank and other funding 1.6 billion, and made up of some 10.5 billion that may be realized from debt restructuring if we succeeded. The reserves that we will build by the close of the program will only constitute 50% of exposure. And it will remain there for a very long time. So even at the end of the program, okay, the NDC at the time we're going to a program without having even run a program would be far, far better, 3 times better than when we have run a program for 3 years with all the sacrifices and the pain. The NDC would have had a much better managed reserve at the Bank of Ghana. At the beginning baseline when we're entering the program, when we said we had a problem that we needed help, we will be in a better shape than after they have come to help us under this government for 3 years. And you are comparing apples with what? Bananas? That is the IMF's own assessment. Now the IMF take consolation in the fact that
Ghana's gold.
Ghana has a track record of debt service to the IMF, historical debt service to the IMF.
Okay.
They take consolation in the fact that we have had access to senior debt of about 25%, which is the lowest historically in the least income countries. So on the basis of that, they are hoping that we can pay. So you see, the IMF is not relying on your conduct. They are relying on the conduct of President Mahama, the conduct of Professor Mills, the conduct of President Kufuor, your predecessors' hard work and their prudence in managing the economy to give you the benefit of the doubt. And you still can talk? Read paragraph 51 to 52 of the IMF document. This is assessment of our creditworthiness. And in fact, the IMF, in concluding that we will struggle to go to the international capital markets, actually says that the high level of debt service to the IMF itself by the end of the program will make it difficult for Ghana to go to the capital market. What it means is that anybody see how much we are paying IMF in debt service.
IMF alone.
IMF alone. this insignificant creditor alone will be scared to give us money. And the president is roaming somewhere dreaming that to service your debt with IMF alone will take over 50% of your reserves.
That is after we are done.
After we are done with the program. And that your level of exposure to IMF, just IMF alone, is enough deterrent. Is enough deterrent to anybody wanting to give you money. They are not even talking about the fact that Usis Kanashi. They are not talking, if investors take all our prospectuses that we used to raise money in the past, what has happened to our country can be actually akin to criminality. You remember the one they came to eat the kenken fish?
Yes.
2019.
Yes.
In the prospectus, do you know the guarantees and the promises they were given? That prospectus said that by 2020, Ghana will join the League of Major Oil Producing Countries in the world, producing 500,000 barrels of crude a day. And that the 3 billion is chicken feed if we are going to be producing this kind of oil. By 2020, we are in 2023. Are we doing 200,000 barrels?
No, not close. That's why I'm surprised. We said that. We put it in a...
So why do you think they celebrated? They have scammed them. And they have succeeded. Charlie, these guys are fools. We can't believe our luck. Let's celebrate. Let's pour champagne. Let's get kinky fish. Let's go to parliament and say we have had triple...
it's a hat trick.
A hat trick. And you remember when they came to parliament, I got up and said, stop there. What hat trick are you talking about? They said they had exited IMF. I said, you have not exited IMF. You ran away from IMF. They didn't complete the program.
I love Radio
They ran away from
0.5.
IMF. They had 7 performance criteria that they had not met. And because they had not met them, you remember the program was supposed to end in 3 years, 2018. They wrote to IMF and said, we are not ready. The exams, we are not sure will pass. Can you give us 1 more year of revision? You remember?
So that was the extension that led to 20.
Then they gave them 1 year to revise and come.
Okay.
That 1 year ended. Okay. And this is the one that they were celebrating. April 2019. Let me read it. It says 7th and 8th reviews under the extended credit facility arrangement and request, a request from Ghana, request for waivers of non-observance of performance criteria.
Waivers of
Requests for waivers of non-observance of performance criteria. Even though we are not meeting the criteria, we are begging you to waive it so we can go and live our lives. This is what they came to celebrate. So if anybody, and I heard the president when you were playing his voice saying in Qatar that they came and inherited a program and you ran away from the program. There were 7 outstanding performance issues that were not addressed. So after 4 years, after 1 year of revision and extension, you still came and said, exams Nede, I beg, IMF, we know you want to help us, but you know, this school thing is not for me. Oh. Let me go and do my hustling to help me. Then IMF said, okay. We have seen that you are a dandite. You can never pass this exam in 10 years. So go and live your life. And then you come to parliament to celebrate failure. You remember I got up and told them, hey, how can you fail at exams after 1 year of extension? And you have been asked to go and live your life because you are not worth our student. And you are here to celebrate. Do you understand exactly what you are doing? You had written to them, applying to them and requesting for them to forgive you because you can't meet the performance criteria. And there were 7 of them. You left. You didn't qualify. You left. You were not properly trained. And you've messed up your life. You are back to the same exams. Can you pass? This time, a more difficult one. Because the one that you ran away from, I'm telling you that our reserve position was enough to cover IMF with just 18% of our reserves. Now you have 161%. Can you survive it? This program, if you look at all the benchmarks, the threshold for debt to GDP for you to be debt sustainable is 55%. And that's the 55% they went and whispered to him that to be able to be debt sustainable, we have to find a way to get our debt levels to 55%. The president was quoted. But when the program came, the program that they have put together, by the time we will finish the program in 2026 to 2027, our debt to GDP will still be 86%.
86%?
Yes. 30% above the debt sustainability threshold.
86% debt to GDP ratio.
Yes.
When we are done with the program.
When we are done with the program. Does that look like a program? When I say the program is not properly negotiated, then you are up in arms. How can you go and structure a program? Your main problem is debt. And by the time you finish the program, the debt question is not being solved.
I love
You have been given a threshold
0.5.
which says that for any country to be debt sustainable, work around 55% of debt to GDP. And you have entered the program to end with 86%.
Then we would not have solved the problem, would we?
Were they there to solve a problem?
That was what the IMF was supposed to do.
I am saying that the IMF doesn't write programs for you. We went there because we just want to manage the economy for 1.5 years and leave and hand over, whichever way it ends. So John Mahama should now be working to bring it down to 55%. We don't have that power. We don't have that capacity. We don't have that sense. We don't have that nationalistic feeling to leave a country in good health to the next person. The other one, which is worrying, is the fact that if you have external debt, you need to be worried about how your total revenue will cover your external debt service. We have breached that threshold, and by the close of the program, we will still not be within the benchmark.
0.5.
The third challenge that exposes your economy to external vulnerabilities and weaken your debt situation is the fact that there must be a certain minimum standard for how the level of coverage of your export proceeds to your external debt. Even though, admittedly, not all the export proceeds are for you. But we just make the assumption that once it is earned by Ghana, it's earned by Ghanaians, it's Ghana. Okay. So assuming that you can pass a law to confiscate all our exports, Blue Sky export, you confiscate. The poor woman who has exported some yam to African market in the United States, you confiscate. Anglo Gold Ashanti and the rest, Cardinal Resources have sold their gold, you confiscate. You export cocoa, you decide you won't pay farmers for their cocoa, you confiscate everything. Talo, Anadaku, whoever exports their oil, it is not part of our share, we confiscate. When you confiscate all of that, you should be able to cover your external debt and leave a significant amount of money. By the end of this program, we will still not meet the benchmark, even though all that process is not for us. By the end of this program, if you look at the projections, This is their own document. And I say the program is poorly negotiated. This program doesn't solve a problem. I'm telling you. We will end up worse than we started. So, you will find that most of the indicators, one of our biggest problems that brought us here was excessive levels of gross financing needs. And I'll explain. Okay. When you are running an economy, you need to make sure that the economy is not overly exposed to so much financing from sources other than your revenue. Part of that is not just the deficit that you are financing, but also the implication of historical borrowings that you have done and the maturities that are occurring, how you are going to finance those maturities. Okay. So if you have a huge public debt, you are worried about how you are going to deal with the debt that are maturing. Mm-hmm. In some instances, you even have to roll over maturities, and there are refinancing challenges. In addition to now raising money to fund the budget. When you put that together, we'll call it gross financing needs. Okay. The rule of thumb is that you should not be doing more than 14 to 15% of gross financing needs at a time in relation to your gross domestic product, the total income of your country. In 2020, before we entered 20, we're already doing close to 20% gross financing needs. That was an alarm bell. Okay. And I kept raising it. And I remember when Gabi said that, their gross financing, I said, we are already doing 25% per the IMF Article 4 consultations that was done in 2021. You were already doing 25%. Almost double the benchmark. That naturally will lead to a challenge in terms of your capital market operations. Because the capital market will begin to get jittery. And the capital market will begin to factor that risk of possible default or that risk of the economy potentially grounding if those sources of financing the gross financing needs curtail. So you begin to look out and find ways to stem back and to cut back on gross financing needs. This continued until we hit 19.8 in 2022 when we're going to the IMF. And the IMF estimates that gross financing needs will continue to be elevated above the prudential requirements by the end of the program. So what are we curing? What are we curing? As a matter of fact, the IMF estimates that as a result of these huge gross financing needs, our current default situation, even though post-default, we had an average risk-averse interest on our capital market of about 4.9% of external borrowing. This is supposed to be elevated to about 9%. Okay. What that means is that Ghana is a very, very risky country. And that our budget outturns are really, really scary. And I can understand why they have been hiding the numbers. You remember when they came to present this budget? I told you the numbers were cooked. They just didn't make sense. It was just to pull some figures together and let somebody, shake the head. I saw 74 billion made up for 52 billion Ghana cedis for debt service, both internal and external, or let's say interest payments. And then another 22 billion for amortization, that is maturing debt obligations, particularly to the external bondholders and creditors. Okay. So that gave us 74, approximately 7.4 billion. Okay. Dollars. That's huge. Not knowing that was too small. When they presented this report, IMF presented the report, the debt service is 171 billion, almost 100 billion more. So where was the 100 billion hiding?
171 billion.
Billion.
The difference between what they
presented is about 100
billion
billion, more than double what they presented.
to the Parliament of Ghana.
To the Parliament of Ghana in the budget. Then, another interesting one is that they are going to borrow 64 billion from concessionary lending. That's about $6.4 billion. Plus drawdown of project financing of about 2.1 billion. All put together, $8.5 billion. And I say, hey. So if I put 8.5 billion to something like 7.4 billion for debt, it means that creditors alone are controlling 16 billion of that budget. And the total outflow of that budget is $20 billion. So by the time creditors refuse to give us 8.5 billion, and we still have to pay $7.5 billion, we are left with $4 billion. And our wage bill is in excess of $5 billion. Just the wage bill.
Yeah. What we pay public sector workers.
Yes. So now, how are you going to pay for statutory funds? You have used all their monies to do this gimmicks. So now, how are you going to pay for public funds? You are paying for the monies that should go to Get Fund, National Health Insurance Authority, the money that should be going to Common Fund, Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund, Exim Bank, all of them. How are you going to pay? How are you going to finance your goods and services? It means that if the president were to leave the Flagstaff House to go and pay a courtesy call on Right Honorable Speaker Bagbe, they have to borrow to buy fuel. In fact, if he was to write official correspondence to the speaker, they have to buy the stationery. They have to pay. They have to go and borrow to buy the stationery. If for some reason the president's toner is not working, he has to borrow to buy toner. And we are not even talking capital expenditure yet.
And you did this analysis from the position of a debt servicing of 74 billion.
Yes.
Not the 170.
Not 170 something. So the budget is gone. So now he was giving us a deficit of about 62 billion Ghana cedis.
Okay.
As it turns out, the deficit is 162 billion. Because if you add the additional 100 billion that has appeared in the service, which is not covered by revenue, to the 61, our deficit will be 162 billion. So this so-called we are going to get deficit of 7. Where is that from? Do you know that last year, he is now reporting that last year, the debt service was 120 billion.
One.
Look, it's good they went to IMF. These people would have been cooking these numbers and Baumia would have been roaming everywhere. 120 billion. As a matter of fact, we crossed the 80 billion line in 2021. In 2021, we were doing 89 billion as per this report. So, Ken Oforiatta, where have you been keeping the other numbers?
In 2021, we didn't even do. Did we do revenues of 89 billion?
These financial engineers, you went and brought and put them at the ministry. Are you surprised that they decided to bring over 40 people from Data Bank to come and sit in that ministry? This is what they came to do. Cooking numbers. And I have challenged them. If they say that there is financial assurances making us to comply with the internal policy of the IMF not to lend to an unsustainable situation, they should produce it. And I'm putting on record that there were no financing assurances. The IMF just played a gimmick to bend back. Our situation was so dire. Look, as at February, this report says that our gross international reserves could only cover 0.5 months of import, 2 weeks of imports.
That's February.
February.
Okay.
Now we have done March. We have done April. We are in May.
Yes.
There's no cent at the Bank of Ghana.
We can't. If
We
we're
don't have
looking
a
for money
cent.
to do imports,
We
we
don't
won't
have
get
a
the
cent. If
penny.
we are buying medicine, no wonder the medicines were not coming. And we had to go to Nigeria to borrow medicine. Look, if you read this report envisages certain flows to build our reserves. And says that we must build our reserves from the 0.5 in February to 0.8 months of imports at the end of 2023. Not even 1 month, 0.8 months,
Okay.
which will be something like 22, 23 days
Okay.
reserves. And that figure is estimated by this project to be $1.74 billion. $1.74 billion. The IMF says that from now, stop intervening in the forex market. So, in other words, the Bank of Ghana can no longer support the cedi with dollars or any currency in the market.
No matter what happens with depreciation.
As we speak now. And that they should build the reserves from where it is now
Which
to
is zero.
to 1.74 billion. And you know where the 1.74 billion is coming from? The financing gap of our BOP. There is expectation that the cumulative flows from the IMF will be $1.2 billion.
Okay.
So the first 600 million that has come is a respite. Another 600 million will come if we meet certain performance criteria at next review, which is probably will be around September, October. Then 600 will come. That gives us 1.2 billion. That money will go to Bank of Ghana. Bank of Ghana will send the cedi equivalent to government to finance its budget and keep the $1.2 billion to build its reserves.
Not touch it. They can't
To
use
build
it for
its
anything.
reserves. No,
Okay.
you can't put it in the market anymore.
Okay.
The World Bank is expected to provide $530 million,
Okay.
which will still help to boost the reserve at the Bank of Ghana. If you put the 530 million together with the 1.2 billion, you get the 1.74 billion that you are looking for as our reserve at the end of the year 2023. So where is our own reserve now? That is not going up. But it is, the figure is exactly and mirrors what will come from the World Bank and the IMF. It means we don't have a cent at the Bank of Ghana. And you don't run an economy as if there will not be headwinds. And you remember consistently, I kept telling them, please, there is nothing like a desirable single-digit depreciation of a currency. And you know why? It's because they had this ignorant economist who kept saying that if you have more than single-digit depreciation of a currency, then you are incompetent in managing the currency. And that the appropriate depreciation should be single-digit. You remember him?
Yes. You're talking
Restoring
about
the value of the cedi. You remember?
Yes.
Dr. Mahmoud Baumia. And you remember I kept warning him that, look, managing a currency and the depreciation of a currency is not a goal variable. It is not like inflation that you say, oh, we have to end the year with inflation. Inflation target is 8% plus or minus 2. No, we don't have that in currency management. Because in currency management, depreciation reflects the shock absorbers that you are managing.
Okay.
It reflects the level of exogenous pressures and how you manage that using your reserves as a shock absorber. And that depreciation can be 20, 30%, but that will reflect the fundamentals of the economy and will constitute an appropriate depreciation of the currency. But this man had his own theories of currency management and brought that theory into government. You know, the end result is that because you've been pursuing this single digit and throwing precious dollars, don't forget the dollars are not for us. Our currency is cedi. So when you have a lot of dollars and euro and pound sterling come to the economy, you must know that at some point they will go back where they came from. So a large size of forex economy that you are controlling in itself poses a risk to external vulnerability and exogenous shocks. So you must prepare for it. That they can decide to take their money out at any point in time, and you must be ready and have the reserves to support it. That's why we say you keep your reserves to build resilience, build buffers, and to face headwinds when they do okay. But Omiya said, no, that's not what I learned. Just throw it and get single digit and clap. The end result is that your currency become overvalued because of the injection of steroids into the body.
Okay.
And when those steroids are no more coming, you see that the manifest signs of your disease becomes acute. After years of living on steroids, if the steroids stop, you can't even survive a day. So when you keep doing that and your currency is overvalued, and at some point in time you face external shocks, and you are not able to continue to pump the steroids, your currency will immediately run to its true value. Its true value was the 54% depreciation.
Okay, so that was what we saw from the
It
beginning
recovers from all the overvaluation caused by the pumping of steroids and currencies that do not belong to the economy. So the currency quickly runs. But if you were applying appropriate monetary policy, the relative depreciation will be spread over a number of years. And the shocks to the economy would have been contained. You get it?
But I'm also wondering what is the appropriate monetary policy, if not pumping dollars.
No. You see, one, if you decide that gold exporters should surrender their dollars to you, you collect the dollars and put it into the reserve. As opposed to these dollars going to their bank. And when they need cedis, they sell the dollars to the bank. The banks get liquidity. You come for dollars to go and trade. You have the dollars at a reasonable price. You cut your nose to spite your face. You think you are solving the problem because you want to have artificial numbers to represent your reserves at the expense of liquidity in the market. And what you are simply doing is that you are conveniently running power pricing regimes within the forex market. So we have the Bank of Ghana rate. We have the interbank rate. And then we have the bank to the individual customer rate. And then we have the Abochi rate. Do you get it?
Yeah.
So even though these rates are going up, Bank of Ghana is suppressing the rate and always quoting Bank of Ghana rate, which is lower, and that is the official record they use to report their numbers. The IMF say, hey, we don't want that gimmick again. Please, unify all the prices. Don't intervene in the market. But when it becomes necessary to intervene in the market, do so at the market rate. We don't want to hear Bank of Ghana rate anymore.
Okay.
That is why in December, people were buying the dollar at 15 cedis, and you were saying that the dollar is 8.6 cedis, so that you can report a small debt numbers when you convert the dollars in your public debt to cedis. A trim from this program.
I love Radio Gold.
We can't do that anymore.
Part of the reforms is to unify exchange rates regime
So when
and
you're
allow
hearing 11
flexible market to work.
When you're hearing 11 CDs and going to the market buying it for 13,
no.
that won't happen again.
I'm telling you.
So the market will determine.
Oh, yes. You remember there was a time I teased them, I said, Bank of Ghana has the rate.
You said Abochi
And Abochi has the dollar. You don't have dollars. When was the last time Bank of Ghana sold dollars? And yet they have their rate.
They still have a rate.
How can you not be selling dollars and have a rate? How can you not be selling dollars and have a rate? How can you have a rate? You don't sell anything. How can you have your rate?
90.5.
So these are the issues. And you see, beyond all of that, I've indicated to you how we are going to build our reserves to 1.7 billion.
From IMF and
From
the
the
World
IMF
Bank.
and the World Bank.
Okay.
And that will cover 0.8 months of import cover. 3 days ago, MPC briefing, Monetary Policy Committee briefing by the governor, he was still quoting that as at April, our reserves could cover 2.4 months of imports. More than what will be achieved at the end of the year.
More than the 1.7.
0.8.
No, I mean in terms of the dollar value. You're saying 1.7.
He's saying that net international reserves is about 2.4 billion. That is discounting for commitments, short-term maturities, and dollars that are needed to pay government obligations in the next 6 months. He has taken all of them out, and he still has 2.4 billion. When he asked all of that, his reserve was $5.2 billion April. The man who reported to the IMF that his reserve could only cover 0.5 months in February, suddenly is reporting in April, when he's still going around begging, the 600 million hasn't come, that it is 5.2 billion. How can you have 5.2 billion? You are not supposed to intervene in the market. And yet, at the end of the year, your reserve is going to be 1.74 billion. And that 1.74 billion, we know where it is coming from. So what would have happened to your 5.2 billion? Do you get it?
Yeah. Because if you're getting 1.7, you should add up to the 5.2.
So we should be heading about 6 billion.
Yes.
And it should be covering, you see, end of the project itself, end of the whole IMF program, our reserve will not even be up to 6 billion. With all the monies that are going to come. So, Dr. Addison, this your cooking data is becoming so embarrassing. He said the exchange rate of 8.6 reduced our public debt by 141 billion at the end of April. At the end of December 2022. That's what he reported. Meanwhile, IMF just released a report containing what you gave them only 3 days ago. And they are saying that your debt to GDP is 88%. You and I were roaming at the IMF there and the World Bank at the spring meeting. When you go for major policy discussions, you won't come and learn. When they are discussing issues about addressing the public debt and they bring discussants, including the Zambian experience, to tell the people of the world how we need to manage our public finances going forward. You will see Ken Oforiatta there. He will be roaming in people's offices, lobbying. Lobbying. Go and do a technical job. You go and lobby. This is a lobbying activity. It's not a negotiated program. Then you went after how many? When did we suspend payment to creditors? Was it not in December?
Yes.
It was in April at the program that he was now making a presentation to investors. Shouldn't you have gone past that?
4 months.
Shouldn't we have been discussing where we ended the last conversation on the proposal on the table? Ken Oforiatta and Dr. Addison were busy making investor presentation at an investor forum 4 months after suspending payments to them.
So 4 months after suspending payments, they had no idea what
They
the
were
offer
now
was.
doing presentation at an investor forum in Washington on the sidelines of the spring meetings. Do these people look like serious people? At that time, you remember the moment they suspended payment, the next day, the Eurobond investors had already formed their committee ready to engage government. 4 months later, you were now doing presentation. And in that presentation, you, the governor, you were there, indicating that your debt to GDP at the end of December was 88% and will end the year 2023 at 98%. And as a matter of fact, the analysis show that over the life of the program, you will still be at a very elevated levels of debt sustainability. 86%. Then the next moment you come to Ghana, we are the people you cook the numbers for. So now the next moment you sit on radio, TV, call journalists and cook numbers for them. You cook the public debt, you cook the debt to GDP, you cook the reserves. None of them is consistent with the numbers you have provided officially to the IMF. So, this IMF program, look at the adjustments. The biggest anchor to our debt sustainability is to slow down your deficit and to slow down on your primary balance and move it to positive primary balance. When your primary balance is in negative, what it simply means is that you are compounding your debt. You are not paying your debt service, you are not paying your interest payments, but you are borrowing to pay the interest. So it means that the interest also become a debt. You know compound interest. That's what you do with negative primary balance. And you have been cooking the primary balance. Not knowing all the time that you are reporting, the IMF says that now we don't want to hear deficit cash basis. We don't want to hear primary balance cash. We want it on a commitment basis. You know why? Commitment basis means that as long as you have incurred the costs, whether you have paid or it is in arrears, treat it as an expenditure. So what they were doing is that when they incur, they don't pay. They keep it in arrears, so that the cash payment becomes small and the deficit is small. The primary balance, good. When they've knocked them inside, scary primary balance numbers, scary deficits, they say from now onwards, we don't want any financial engineering, commitment basis. It has emerged that arrears alone is about 44 billion Ghana cedis at the end of 2022. And that the whole of 2022, IPPs, the people who give us the electricity, produce the electricity, sell it to ECG, ECG collects the money, doesn't pay. And as we speak now, the whole of 2022, the arrears owed to IPP, they didn't pay 1 cent. They didn't pay 1 cent, oh, and they owe them 19 billion Ghana cedis.
19 billion cedis. When you say arrears, does that mean money is incurred before they supplied in 2020?
Invoices that have been, you know, when the IPPs supply the power, they will send invoice to tell how much they have supplied, how much you owe them. When they collect it, they open their drawer and they put it there.
So ECG gets the power, sells it to us, we give them the money, but they don't give the money.
When the invoice come, they open the drawer and put it there. So that drawer, if you go and open it, 19 billion is sitting there. As if by putting it under the drawer, it will disappear. So now, they have not paid these people for 19 billion. So the same question we all ask. When you go to buy power, don't you pay?
We do. That's why I'm surprised.
The worst case may even be the postpaid. But for the prepaid, when you pay, they load it onto your card.
Yes.
You give them the money and you walk away. Is that not it?
Yes.
What have they been doing with that money? What happened to the money that their
PDS.
PDS collected? 1.5 billion. Where is that money? How come they haven't paid? Then contractors, service providers to National Health Insurance, contractors, those who build, get fund schools and all those, despite borrowing huge sums of money on Dachi and the rest, they owe them 25 billion they have not paid. This headmaster did a thorough job. So now they are saying from now on, no arrears. Every year, arrears is 0. Draw a program to pay the arrears over 7 years. So it means that John Mahama is coming to pay the 44 billion.
The 44 billion CDs in arrears.
Yeah. John Mahama will be the one to bring the debt to GDP down to the threshold required of 55%, not them. Because they will end the program with 86%. And the financing needs for this entire program is scary. 15 billion is required over the next 3 years. $15 billion is required over the next 3 years. 3 billion coming from the IMF, the World Bank about 1.6, 1.7 billion, and some 10.5 billion expected to be realized if we are able to conclude negotiations per the IMF parameters with our creditors. And these are the creditors, as at April last month, they were now doing presentation to them in the forum.
So we do not have an agreement with them.
I'm saying that even the official creditors, we don't have the financing assurances. You see, people think that financial assurances is the fact that the creditors have agreed to give us more money. No. There are the loans that we say we cannot pay. They are covered by an agreement.
Okay.
Those agreement has enforcement clauses. You can go to court and enforce them. But you are sitting down to negotiate with the person, not to enforce the original agreement. And that you want to reach a new agreement based on a restructuring that is acceptable to the two of you. When there is a conclusion as to how the new arrangement is going to look, you issue a memorandum of understanding signed between you and the creditors, saying that we have surrendered our rights and have forgiven the borrowing country the obligation under the old agreement.
Okay.
And that we are assuring you that we won't come back to it, even in the law court. But we have now signed on to a new arrangement, and these are the details of the new arrangement. And it is the one I will now enforce.
So that's the financing.
That is the financing assurances.
We don't have that, do we?
It is a memorandum of understanding signed between the creditor and the borrower, substituting the old agreement for a new agreement. Then, after several months, the official bilateral creditors that you have applied to for debt treatment under the G20 Common Framework managed to bring together the members to form a creditor committee to be co-chaired. And immediately they said they have formed a committee to sit on Ghana's case, and that we will do everything to see that we are able to reach an agreement in the shortest possible time. But point to the fact that the bigger problem is not even us. So Ghana should fast-track its arrangement and conversations with commercial creditors and Eurobond holders.
Okay.
So that there's a holistic, conclusive agreement on all your loans. So when IMF now plugs those new numbers into your debt sustainability framework and throws them over the duration of 10, 20 years, you will be debt sustainable. So on the basis of that, you are compliant with the internal policies of IMF that they don't land into an unsustainable situation. Now your numbers look sustainable. Did you read the release from the creditor committee?
Yes,
It only said that we have constituted a creditor committee,
yes,
and who are co-chairing, and that the other creditors, government to proceed and fast track the other creditors. Then the IMF somersaults to interpret that to mean financing assurances. But I know why that happened, because our economy was in dire straits. Like I'm saying, if we were to buy paracetamol, we won't have a cent at the Bank of Ghana to buy it. And there was an SOS letter written and co-signed by the finance minister and the governor to the managing director of the IMF, painting this gloomy picture. And you know that the IMF more or less has become the chief PRO for our program. You know that.
yes.
You know that. If you read the document, the things she said recently when that picture where Akufo-Addo went to meet him, Ken Ofori-Atta went to meet him, and he said that it was COVID and the rest. If you read his own document a few days later, the IMF managing director that said that no. A few days later, listen, said large external shocks in recent years have exacerbated Ghana's pre-existing fiscal and debt vulnerabilities, resulting in a loss of international market access, increasingly constrained domestic financing, and reliance on monetary policy financing of the government. He says what? Pre-existing.
Yeah. That it existed before the shock.
Pre-existing fiscal and external debt vulnerabilities led to the international capital market closing the door on us, led to increasingly constrained domestic financing opportunities, and a resort to the central bank to print money and fund the budget. That is the long and short of this one. No?
Yeah.
Do you get it? So if the IMF managing director was not doing PR job, he was not excited by the presence of the finance minister and whatever they discussed in private, why was he saying things contrary to what they know at IMF? And when we were there at the spring meeting, at the least opportunity, if you want, you can be discussing Sri Lanka. He will be advocating for Ghana.
The IMF managing director.
And people say, but this woman, does she have a relation in Ghana or maybe some uncle? I am saying that this IMF document is the result of a lobbying activity. We don't qualify. Read paragraph 50 of this document. Read paragraph 50 of this document. You will see what I'm saying. Paragraph 50. 50, 51, 52. Very interesting reading.
Yeah, we do not qualify.
So, staff expects, listen, staff expects to receive in due time sufficient assurances that the ongoing debt restructuring will generate financing consistent with program parameters and will restore debt sustainability. What does that mean? They are still expecting to receive. Now look at the sub-paragraph. Staff is comfortable. Staff is comfortable that sufficient assurances will be delivered by official bilateral creditors under the common framework before considering of Ghana's request for an arrangement under the ECF by the IMF Executive Board. If you read 50, 51, 52, same language.
when they gave the impression that that had already been, the assurances were already given.
Saying that this is a lobbying activity.
That our government essentially lobbied.
What was the team?
Not
that,
negotiated.
What
the
was
program.
the team that went to negotiate our program?
I only see here that they had discussions with the vice president, the governor of the
That
Bank
one, they
of
just
Ghana.
came in room. That one is nothing. That one, it's not like you have a program. We are in a. You see, when you are negotiating a program, you are sitting there. You have a proposal on the table.
Okay.
You have your team and your technical advisors. The IMF has its team. Okay, you are pushing the case. You are indicating how you are going to achieve fiscal consolidation. You are indicating how you are going to deal with your debt sustainability. You are indicating how you are going to address your financial sector stability problems. You are indicating how you are going to grow the economy. You are indicating how you are going to create jobs. You are indicating the policy options that are available to you in order to ensure that there is irreversibility. Then the IMF is analyzing the data that you are presented to support those your arguments.
Okay.
And punching holes and making recommendations and suggesting and doing sensitivity analysis. Putting those analyses to clear sensitivity tests based on the understanding of the historical and focused behavior of your economy and the global economy. It is not a desktop research that one sits in his office and writes some thesis. So the IMF team came. Of course, they want to meet the governance at the top. So they come to the president. This is our mission. We have received your request. The vice president, we have received your request. But these are the steps we are taking. These are our expectations from your end. And that when we finish our work, we will communicate back to you. They come to parliament. We are in this country. We have so far engaged the vice president. We have spoken to the president. We have spoken to Minister of Finance. We are still doing some digging. You ask them, so how are our numbers looking? Very diplomatic. Oh, we haven't gotten there. We are still looking. So our debt to GDP, we are not concluded. We are still looking. And I had the mission chief sit on city to say that they engage parliament. Is our engagement?
I love Radio
They came to give you information.
And then when you ask them questions, they won't answer.
That they were still looking.
They haven't reached any conclusion, so it is premature. It's not as if they came and say, Ghana's program, where is the projector? Throw the numbers. These are the assumptions under which we are arriving at these numbers. We have tested these numbers against so and so, and this is how the figures are looking. We think that if we do A, B, C, D, this is how the numbers will look. And based on our situation and our solution, this is what the authorities think they want to do. We agree, we disagree, we'll recommend. They say they'll go and look at it and come back. Do you people have anything to add to improve this process? Do you get it?
Yeah.
Then we'll say, okay, you have just made your presentation. Can you give us 3 days to go and study this document and come back? Then we'll come back and say, oh, here we think this, here we think that. There's, oh, no. You get it?
Yeah.
That is engagement. That is consultation. That is what leads to developing a national program. The IMF program is not a Akufo-Addo program. It is Ghana government's program. They are dealing with the sovereign Ghana. And Ghanaians must make inputs to determine what the solutions are not in the hands of government alone. There are experts and technical people. In fact, ordinary women, you can go to Makwala and they'll give you some fantastic ideas of how to revive this economy. Because they are the key operators of this economy. You don't know better than them. As a matter of fact, what we learn in classroom is what they practice. Then you go and sit at some desk. The planning and research department. Can you put something together for me? Then they put it. The governor, Then you put it together and say, do you know that another CBG is coming? When the governor was bullish that our banking sector is strong, is resilient, is liquid, it has returned to profitability. Little did we know that he has secretly told the IMF that they will be resolving banks.
Honorable.
And they are spending 30 billion, 22 billion this year, 8 billion next year, 30 billion. And they will be issuing banking sector resolution bonds of 19.7 billion. And when the last time they mentioned banking sector resolutions, we got almost 400 and something financial institutions go down. And they set up a CBG to take 9 banks. That is what they have signed on to.
I'll come back to that shortly. We'll have to take a break. When we come back, Honorable Isaac Adongo is saying
that yes, Sri Lanka might have negotiated and gotten an SLA sometime in August. The consequence of that is that they are still not getting board approval. We can't afford that. We have to get a board approval by March, and we are en route to being successful with that. And that's important. The issue of whether we have negotiated properly or not, let me be very clear that yes, Sri Lanka might have negotiated and gotten an SLA sometime in August. The consequence of that is that they are still not getting board approval. We can't afford that. We have to get a board approval by March, and we are en route to being successful with that. And that's important.
Well, that takes us to 44 minutes past 9 here in the studios of Radio Gold 90.5 FM. And I have Honorable Isaac Adongo in the studio. He is even suggesting that listening to the finance minister, I think he even admits, Honorable Adongo, that actually they didn't negotiate well. You are saying they didn't even negotiate. They just lobbied. And then a program was presented to them. I want to understand how this works. I have spoken to the former finance minister, Setekpe, over and over again. He said, we carried our own homegrown program to the IMF. We negotiated, and there was some agreement as to how that can work in achieving the objectives for which we went to the program. You are saying, in this case, we carried nothing there. We just went there and said we needed an agreement as urgently as possible. So the program we have before us, and the actions we are supposed to take, who then put those together?
Yes. I didn't say they didn't take anything there.
Okay.
But what they presented is a desktop compilation of information.
Desktop?
Yes. It's not a consultative process that produced whatever document they send. As a matter of fact, me, as a member of parliament, I'm hearing the name of the so-called document for the first time.
Okay.
That the authorities' economic program, supported by the ECF arrangement, builds on the government's post-COVID-19 program for economic growth. What is that? What animal is called that? It builds on the government's post-COVID-19 program on economic growth.
You've not seen such a program before?
Where? And I sit in parliament. And post-COVID would have been 2021, 2022.
Okay.
And I have not seen a policy document called post-COVID economic growth.
You are the deputy ranking member on the finance committee.
In fact, I can even be an ordinary member of the committee. I can just not even be on the finance committee, but I'm a member of parliament. Entrusted with the responsibility for policy approvals that underpin the budget. I know as we speak, the government is implementing the medium-term program which is the program of coordinated social and economic something. That is what I know. That is the document I have been served.
Okay.
That is the document Akufo-Addo said will guide his government for his second term. That is what I know. So, if I, sitting here, have not even made input into this post-COVID economic program, there has not been any forum at which a conversation has happened to seek the inputs of his closest working group, which is the Finance Committee, the committee that oversees the work of the Finance Ministry. Are you then surprised that I am saying this is not a Ghana program? This is an Akufo-Addo, Bawumia, and Ken Ofori-Atta sitting in their rooms, putting numbers together and putting assumptions together and conjecturing what Ghanaians think will resolve our problem. You don't tackle major economic issues like that. You won't get the buy-in of Ghanaians. Now, when you bring legislation emanating from this document to Parliament and there's resistance, will you be surprised? Because it is not their document. They don't own it. They don't associate with it. But this involves a lot of change management. This involves a lot of changes to the way we have lived our lives. It involves a lot of sacrifices from Ghanaians. It involves a lot of trade-offs. And it is the reason Ghanaians must be at the center of building this program. So that when it comes, we all agree that this must be done. Yeah, we are suffering the pain, but we are aware because we think that is the bitter pill we have to swallow. We are not new to it. But boom, a new terminology. Post-COVID economic program. You remember they kept mentioning some names earlier?
Yes.
When they went there, they were mentioning some names. This was not even featuring.
No.
Kojo Opon Nkrumah was the one talking about it a lot. Did they feature here?
No, that was not the name that they were mentioning. So I'm even surprised. So you have never,
no,
ever.
I don't know anything like that. I'm reading it for the first time, and I'm not surprised because they don't want scrutiny. They don't want scrutiny. They don't want to carry. All they want is that 1.5 years. How do we scrapple through? How do we get through this 1.5 years? How can people who have been collecting just Eurobond alone, you've been taking $3 billion for 5 years? It didn't help you. $600 million. Huh? And that is the solution to our problems. You know what? They will wait. When the $600 million, the time for another review, they will start running around. Look, Sena, our country is in a big, big mess. We are in a big hole. I'm telling you. And the magnitude of the problem that we face is so huge that you can only imagine. And this is because of years of self-denial, years of covering up, years of cooking the numbers to look good. But you see, financial matters cannot be hidden for too long. If you owe, you owe. You see? So if you come to Parliament and you say, oh, our debt service is 74 billion. When you are going to the program, they want to be sure of the level of debt service. Because you have to pay. They have to be sure that they are not giving you 3 billion, 15 billion, only for you to throw them into debt service. So they know whoever you owe. They have the records. And then they dig and dig and they realize that, no, Master, this is your debt service of 74 billion. It's 171.9. And you say, yeah, that's true. Now, when you plug in the 171 billion, you see, when we were going to IMF, there was no question about debt sustainability. Yeah. Ghana's debt was sustainable. Very sustainable. There were no questions as to any doubt of our gross international reserves at the Bank of Ghana being able to cover our exposure to IMF and still leave quite a healthy amount of money to support our import and export trade. At the time we were going to the IMF, there was no question about people having to lose their investments in order for us to get money. Our financing did not include 10.5 billion of investors' money. Today, the bigger question for Ghana are these negotiations of a creditor committee of the bilateral official creditors and that of the private and commercial creditors, the Eurobonds. It's the issue of treatment or debt service arrears. We have not paid our debt service since December. So we have a large chunk of arrears to be dealt with. So the creditors are not only having a conversation as to whether we can pay in future and what they can do to help us in future, but they are also having a problem to do with the arrears of debt service that have accumulated. And this program envisages that once this program starts, there will not be further accumulation of debt service arrears. But then Ghana and the creditor committees are being employed upon to respect an IMF policy, which is a policy of lending into arrears. In other words, the negotiations should conclusively deal with the public debt and the public debt arrears. Don't forget that those arrears have crystallized and must be paid. Look, let me say it here. It is not possible for China to just come and appear as a co-chair of a creditor committee and on that day be signing financing assurances. China, with all the geopolitics that we know. China doesn't believe that a sovereign country can be poor. China believes that a sovereign country can be broke. But then, you can pay. If you don't want to look hard and fast enough, we can help you find where you will pay. So we are not about to just sign financing assurances without exploring other avenues that is consistent with our national interests. And in China, decisions are not taken at the level of Ken Ofori-Atta and Akufo-Addo. It is taken at the Council of the Communist Party. And at that place, they don't know Ken. They don't know Addison. They don't know Akufo-Addo. They know Ghana and their national interests. And they will remember that you took them to Hinaini to go and show them bauxite buried somewhere. And they did an assessment and they believe that there's bauxite there. That bauxite has not disappeared. They know that when you contracted the loan from them to build the Bui Power, you use cocoa to service it. You're still exporting cocoa. They know when you took the 1 billion to come and build the Atuabo gas pipeline, you use proceeds from oil and operations to pay. The oil has not diminished. The gas has not disappeared. So you can pay. It's just that we must help you to pay. And then they meet for the first time. Say, "Oh, China, you are co-chair." Then you call the council. "Hey, council, I'm a co-chair. Oh. Can you give me approval to sign off financing assurances for Ghana?" When they know the ostentatious life that your president is living, when they know that your president just went and dug a hole and threw close to 400 million Ghana cedis into that hole, Or you think they don't know? When they know that your president has been hiring private jets despite all calls to seize that ostentation because the state cannot afford it. Then after you have gone to do your, how do you call it? Premasem. You know Prema? Mensem. You know Mensem? Gangaria. You know, you want to show that challenge you be guy. Then when you finish, come and pay your debt. You say, oh, I can't pay. They will squeeze your boss. When Ken Ofureta was using data bank collecting the fees, didn't you know that the loans must be paid? As we speak, has he paid anything to the state? When they sought to monopolize the bond market, do you know that even at the Bank of Ghana, they created primary dealers to deal in our reserves? And these guys, they know how to make money. So now, our reserves, anytime they have to sell dollars to financial institutions to give liquidity, that one too, they must have primary dealers made up of financial institutions that we all know, the Black Star Brokerage and Co. They will now come, take the dollars at a lower rate and go and sell it in the market and make a margin. Pursuing arbitrage in pursuit of public office. I have said, look, how the governor of the central bank managing financial institutions that have just suffered from the strain of recapitalization. They've suffered the strain of systemic risk that led to a run on our banks that we have never seen before. Every day, the banks were just basically paying out money to depositors, and nobody was bringing money to the bank. Sat there with all the rules of single obligor limits, which bars financial institutions and banks which are prudently managed not to give more than 10% of their capital to one borrower. Sat there and watch this bank give over 80% of their capital to one borrower.
Ghana's gold.
The government of Ghana.
Radio Gold.
And he looked on. Lowered all prudential requirements when the government was struggling to borrow to make it easy for them to lend to governments. The National Pensions Regulatory Authority issued a directive asking pension funds to increase their stake in government borrowing or lending to 85%. Risk 85% of pensions money on governments and only find investment for another 15%. At a time when it was clear that Ghana was heading for debt default because all the rating agencies were telling us that, look, we are going to default. And you know what they have failed to realize, and what Bawumia has failed to realize, is that forever the records will show that in the Fourth Republic, he managed Ghana's economy to 54% inflation. The records will show that historically, he is a man who ever delivered 54% depreciation of the currency. It will show that he is a man who borrowed over 70 billion from the Bank of Ghana. The records will show that he was the one who supervised the substitution of a AAA-rated bank's guarantee for a comic insurance company whose total assets was not even enough to cover half of the risk that they were asking them to write. The records will forever show that.
How about Adongo? We have to bring this to a close, but before we go, have you changed your mind about the finance minister going?
You know, I want to put this in tree. It will come out better. Yabrebe afinsi ene eche. Ene papai. We do obey in our prayer. See a beau, say a be sorry. We declare prayer. Economy in where we are to happen some. I can't 1.5 years and only into me. So 1.5 years, no sooner better than a bosom no matter office. What? Ye den konko ne mponche ne nwan be wa kotwa modwa egunu so no asore akọ.
So now you are prepared to live with the rest of his tenure.
It's out of my hands. I don't want to see this grandstanding will let him go and then it doesn't work and then people's emotions are toyed with and then we get a dip in our credibility and all of that. It's left to Akufo-Addo. If you have been made a president and you go to choose your kinsman to come and collapse your kingdom, how is that my problem?
It is your problem because you are representative of
And we
people.
did what we could. We couldn't. Everybody knows my position on that man. I was on record to have spoken broken English on the floor when I said, is it by force? Is it by force to serve us? This work, you say you are not being paid. And we say, it's okay, you have done enough, thank you. An unpaid job, you say you won't go. His colleagues got up and said 98 people, it didn't go anywhere. Why should I not invest my energies on something else? I have had a question today I answered a question on OKFM. They said, given how the economy is ending and the picture I'm painting, can the NDC save this economy when we take over power? And I laughed. I said, what we're experiencing, if there's any group of people who have dealt with a much bigger crisis in our country, what we're seeing doesn't compare to 10% of the crisis NDC has ever dealt with. As a young boy, growing up in Obuasi, my parents used to go and take a cheat to be able to buy basic essentials like milk, tea, and bread. And when I took that cheat to go and get these items for the family, I queued sometimes 2 kilometers to get bread and to get gari. And anytime I speak about this, I feel sad for the memory of Professor Kwesi Botwe. I recall in those days, the budget that we call the budget, it was in that budget that you hear the price of milk, the price of sugar, the price of a bunch of plantain. Have you ever queued to buy milk?
No.
Or
not that I
sugar?
recall.
Have you ever?
Not that I recall.
This looks like history, right?
Yeah.
On top of that, 1 million of our compatriots were repatriated from Nigeria. At a time that we could not even feed ourselves here. It took His Excellency Jerry John Rawlings and his team through the Economic Recovery Program, which instituted structural reforms under the Structural Adjustment Program, with the program of action to mitigate the social cost of adjustment. Alhaji Hudu Yahya is still alive, a stalwart of that regime, who was the head of the National Mobilization Program. Our current Council of State chairman is still alive. My uncle Kofi Totobi Kwache is still alive. These men serve as reservoir of the conscience of our country, and they've seen it all.
Okay.
The NDC is the only political party that has the antecedents and the record and the competence and the selflessness to deal with a problem similar to 1983. And this one, we don't need those people. We just need, as a Adongo, what do you call it, Atoforsin, Jenapo and Co, and we will deal with this matter.
That's a lot of confidence. Honorable Isaac Adongo is Member of Parliament for Bolgatanga Central and Deputy Ranking Member on the Finance Committee of Parliament. Thank you very much for your time.
It's my pleasure.
Well, I've taken too much of a charm's time. He's coming up next with the mid-morning show.
Yeah.
Guys, Dear Nami, when I was seen Nantia, okay.
Also, yeah, we are boyfriend to me and say, oh, baby, need by ya, what best so.